Thank you, and again, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining us today to talk about the Stockholm Convention needs assessment and the reporting that will be undertaken between now and next year at the next conference of the parties. I'll try today to provide you a bit of background information on what this exercise was in the past, so how it evolved since the beginning of the convention in the past 10 years. And then I'll focus the second part on the actual reporting requirements and how to use an interactive spreadsheet that has been developed by the Secretariat to assist parties in reporting financial needs for this exercise. What is the needs assessment and what is its history is what I'll spend the beginning of this presentation, and then we'll focus on the main elements of the reporting for this year. First of all, as a reminder, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with this issue, the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants has a financial mechanism enshrined in the convention. Here you have on the screen Article 16 and paragraph 6 that define the mechanism. As you know, the interim financial arrangements under Article 14 are those of the GEF, the Global Environment Facility. But the COP has a number, the Conference of the Parties, the COP remains the body that decides a number of issues with regard to the financial mechanism. And among them, the COP has a mandate to decide the modalities to determine the amount of funding necessary and available for the implementation of the convention. The COP has the mandate to decide the modalities to undertake the assessment, the evaluation of funding required using different sources of information. I'll stop maybe there on this slide because this is maybe, if you want to understand what we're talking about, the essence of it. The needs assessment is really an evaluation of the financial resources needed by developing country parties and parties with economies and transition to implement the convention. As you know very well, central to the Stockholm Convention negotiations was really the availability of financial resources to developing country parties and parties with economies and transitions to undertake activities and to meet the obligations. And for that, well, in the provisions that we saw in the convention text, we saw that negotiators had really understood that, well, there was a need to find an underlying basis for the amounts to be provided by the financial mechanism, either through the Global Environment Facility or through other ways. And therefore, the need assessment is crucial to identify the funding that parties need to look at three things. First, the direct obligations that they have under the convention. For example, to reduce unintentional emissions of chemicals under Annex C. Second, the necessary activities for the implementation of the convention. For example, a change of legislation required to ban a number of substances. And thirdly, well, there is a need to provide funding for indirect costs for the implementation. For example, to undertake the monitoring of air and water quality and assess whether they contain POPs or not. So that's the wide range of activities that are needed in support of the implementation of the convention and its objectives. The needs assessment exercise is based mainly on the information that is provided in countries' national implementation plans. The NIPs, as you know, provide a list of activities, priorities, and usually the costing or funding required to implement these. And there have been two approaches in NIPs to address the issues and the funding. One is through the development of action plans on specific issues, for example, pesticides, stockpile management, or PCB-related work. Another approach is to look at each article and the obligations and there define number of programs and costings. So these were two approaches that were used and are really crucial to understand how parties have looked at the problems they faced and the needs they required to really have the means to address these problems. Crucial also for the needs assessment is that the needs assessment is a basis for discussions under the Global Environment Facility replenishment. We will talk about this later, but there is a direct link between the reporting done by countries, the report presented to the Conference of the Parties, and discussions within the GEF replenishment, so the negotiation for funding again the GEF and provisions of funds to the chemicals focal window. But let me go back first maybe in history and talk about the preliminary needs assessment and the initial work of the Conference of the Parties on this from COP1 and 2. At COP1 and also previously in the negotiations, there was debate and discussions on how would the funding required be assessed and that a study should be prepared to look into the future, so in the period 2006-2010, and how this study could be put into the GEF, could be brought to the consideration of the GEF at the time of its fourth replenishment negotiations. The GEF 4 replenishment negotiations were held in 2005 and 6, and then they allowed the provision of $300 million to the POP's focal window. But at the time, the COP didn't have a full assessment and asked the Secretariat to prepare terms of reference that were discussed again at COP2 in 2006. And among the issues for discussions, interestingly, and they will come back, were the methodology, who would be responsible for taking the assessment, and then also would the GEF be able to meet the funding requirements. So decision SC212 asked parties to submit information and asked the Secretariat to prepare a preliminary report. This report, a preliminary report for the assessment of 2006-2010, drew upon information that was available in national implementation plans and highlighted already some areas where work was really required. And they're listed here on the presentation: capacity building, legislation, stockpile elimination, monitoring and research, etc. You have also data from actually the average estimated cost per party, which was around $25 million per party. But this was only a preliminary assessment, and the COP asked for a further assessment to be undertaken for presentation at COP3. This assessment was for the period 2010 and 2014, and the methodology to be used was again to build upon the previous needs assessment, so to look at information in NIPS, the costs related to these three categories we've mentioned previously: direct obligations under the convention, activities that were necessary, and indirectly necessary activities for the implementation of the convention. Additional information used was also Article 15 reporting by countries and supplementary information provided by party or other sources on availability of finances. The report that was finally presented at COP4 in 2009 drew upon half of the NIPS of eligible parties for support. It highlighted the need for $10 billion of funding, and you have the regional breakdown highlighted on the slide. This report, although provided a number of information, also highlighted a number of key issues that had not been included in the report. And one of the recommendations, or one of the conclusions made by the experts that developed the report was that the costs estimated were actually less than the estimation. There had been a lack of resources, financial resources, on the small period during which the assessment was done. There was a lack of information, and there was also the idea that the information on which the report was based was the one of the submitted NIPs, and a number of countries had not yet ratified the convention and not even submitted their NIPs. So it was a partial vision. But the report still provided some good data. There were simply questions on the methodologies because there was a lack of consistency in the report, in the using of the data. The consultants that undertook the previous needs assessment highlighted that there was no standardized ways of reporting costs. When they looked at the national implementation plans of countries, they saw costs either highlighted through action plans, so for very specific activities, or on a more aggregate basis by article. And they had difficulties of reconciling both methodologies or even of verifying the methodologies. Another issue related to that is the fact that there was no distinction between baseline and incremental costs. For those of you who are not familiar with these two terms, they relate directly to the logic of the Global Environment Facility to finance projects, and then we will come back to these. But understand baseline costs as those for a business as usual scenario, understanding that countries would address an issue without having the global environmental benefits, meaning that, for example, you're undertaking some infrastructure or some health work at the national level, which is a baseline work, but you're not specifically addressing the POP issue. And the incremental cost is that additional cost that you have to address the chemical issue, and also that has global positive effects being beyond your local population. So for example, you're having a pesticide, POP's pesticide management program, which allows the decontamination of a river that flows and into neighboring countries, and thus addressing the POPs issue addresses a global concern. But we will come back to the baseline and incremental cost issues. The consultants in the previous needs assessment report also identified that the costing in national implementation plans was not consistent, and that maybe activities needed to be costed rather than simply larger, broader categories. The needs assessment report was nevertheless adopted by the COP and transmitted to the Global Environment Facility at the time of the GEF 5 replenishment process. This process led to the allocation of 420 million to the chemicals window, out of which 375 million were made available for POPs. There you are. And the follow-up decision invited parties to provide information on additional sources of funding outside those of the GEF, and to prepare a report, terms of reference for the next needs assessment, and to develop a format that would facilitate the assessment in the future. And this format will be the basis of our discussions later. Now I will go back to last year, the COP5 that was held in April in Geneva. And since 2009, as you are aware, new POPs have been added to the convention. And there was a general feeling at COP5 and previously that the funding was no longer sufficient to cover the implementation of the conventions, and that further funds would be needed to address these new POPs. Discussions also highlighted the fact that the needs assessment should coincide with the GEF replenishment process, so that the report could go directly to the GEF before negotiations for refunding of the GEF started. There were also discussions on other ongoing financial discussions beyond the Stockholm Convention, whether for the Basel-Rotterdam Convention, for the Mercury negotiations, or under the United Nations Environment Programme's Executive Director's consultations on consultative process on financing the chemicals and waste clusters. At COP5, a decision was taken on the needs assessment. Well, first to undertake one using a format that we will look at shortly. The reporting will cover 2 periods, the funding used in 2010 and 14 and funding required in the next period. The COP requested parties to provide submissions using the format, but also to provide a summary of their NIPs, highlighting critical financial and substantive issues. The COP requested the Secretariat to prepare a report on additional financial resources beyond the GEF. The terms of reference that were adopted were very similar to the ones in the previous exercise. So the report will be developed by the Secretariat and undertaken by independent experts. The assessment will consider the 3 types of activities we've mentioned before, as well as Article 15 reporting and additional information. And there will be an assessment of the previous methodology and data and experience gained from the previous experience. The key change that this report or these terms of reference have is that previously in needs assessment, the Secretariat and the experts would look into the NIPs for the financial information. But this has changed now. The focus is much more on countries reporting of their own financial needs directly to the Secretariat. While this may be a challenge because it will look like extra work on the parties, it's also an opportunity to really provide detailed and up-to-date information on needs of each party to implement the convention. This will also provide the opportunity to look at specific challenges that have arisen since, for example, a country has developed its NIP. I'm thinking of new POPs. And it will also provide you the opportunity to bring to highlight that some previously planned activities that you wanted to do in the previous period could not be implemented due to the lack of resources. So you can carry over and really point the total amount of resources used. On the basis of the reporting by parties, there will be a report prepared that will be submitted next year at COP6 of the Stockholm Convention and be given to the GEF for consideration. The main element for reporting is an information collection form that has been adopted by the Conference of the Parties in decision SC522. As mentioned before, in the past, parties did not have a common approach, and we are hopeful that with this reporting format, all of the parties will be able to report in a similar manner and to provide really up-to-date information that will be easily added and analyzed by the independent experts, and also will provide a better picture to the COP on financial needs for the implementation. Some of the elements, here is the adopted report, the adopted format, and you will see that on the left-hand side, it separates horizontally the different articles and provisions, and on the top right-hand side, you see the divide between the 2 reporting periods in the past, 2010-14, and in the future, 2015-19. Also distinction between baseline and incremental costs. So when the COP adopted this format, they requested the Secretariat to develop an information collection tool that would be based on this format and that would help parties in reporting this. Because if I were a government and I would look at this format, I would have really a lot of difficulties of providing input on the basis of the NIPs. So the Secretariat has been working to develop a methodology and a tool that will assist you in this reporting. The general approach that you have to think of is that the priorities, the activities, the costing are often defined in national implementation plans. These would be really the basis for the reporting. We also suggest that from that, you develop a list of programs and activities that are planned or are taking place in the 2 reporting periods. In order to save a bit of time, I might now switch to the second part of the presentation, because the following slides will give you an idea, but it's maybe easier for you to actually look at the form. I will do that now if I can. There. This is the format that the Secretariat has developed on the basis of the electronic tool. It's an interactive tool, an Excel spreadsheet. So when you will be using it, you will need to allow the content to be interactive, which is called enabling macros. Once you have done that, this will allow for the possibility to click in the form and to have additional forms, as you will see here. But I will first maybe explain the different elements in this reporting form. There is firstly, well, some initial information on the name of the country, the geographical information, the NIP dates, and the submitting officer. There is also a link here to a guidance manual that is available with the electronic form. But to go directly to the form, I will show you here the main elements that you have. You will see that it's nearly identical to the one adopted by the COP, except for these buttons on which you can click. You also have links to different articles of the convention, and if you click on them, these articles will appear. So you can have always the reference. You will also have some help functions available in the small forms. The general idea is that on the basis of the activities that you have, you will report under the activities by article. Sorry, I'm just, there you are. So, for example, if we were to take a PCB project that you are undertaking, you have a major PCB project. Well, the main article it is looking at is the intentionally produced POPs, and it is an industrial chemical listed under Annex A. By clicking on the button, you will have this form appear where you're asked to identify chemicals on the left-hand side, related obligations, the type of programs. This is one among 2 forms. So here, if we have a PCB project, I will look at clicking on PCBs, electric systems and equipment. And here, you know, if your project is about elimination of electrical equipment still used in your grid, you will provide the related obligations. So eliminate use in production, eliminate the use of PCB and equipment, measures to reduce risks to exposure from PCBs, and environmentally sound management of PCBs. Here, there are the types of areas you're undertaking, you're working on. So you've got maybe a legal component in that project. You'll have an environmentally sound management, disposals, and you can click on the relevant categories here. At the bottom of this form, you will continue and have the opportunity to there provide the funding required. Imagine that your project on PCB has a national component in which the government is providing $500,000. You will put in here $500,000, add it, and it will appear here. You have the opportunity of adding several lines. Here there is a distinction between national resources, what we will then report as baseline costs, and external resources that we will highlight as incremental costs. This is a way for, the Secretariat has decided that to facilitate your reporting and not to confuse baseline and incremental costs, we would make a distinction between national and external resources. So to go back to a project, imagine that you're receiving $1 million from the Global Environment Facility. You can add this here. And then you can also add a contribution, let's say, of the national electrical companies, so the national industries, for $350,000. And you also have assistance from, let's say, the World Bank as co-financing for your project for an amount of $500,000. And here you have, at any time, the possibility to add inputs specifically for this article. You're also asked whether an activity is consistent with the national implementation plans. And here you can say, see section 2 of your plan. You should provide information on whether the activity, on the status of the activity. This is a completed project. This project is ongoing. And also links to the other conventions. If you save, you will have the opportunity to add more entries for this particular article. Let's say an activity, you have another industrial chemicals, or you can say no and finish and close this article going back to the form. So here, if we were to add another program or activity on Annex A industrial chemicals, we could think, for example, that, well, you have a project on PFOS. You have a specific project on PFOS. So here you can go and select, oh, sorry, PFOS is an Annex B chemical. But let's think of another type of project you could have on octa and penta-BDEs. So you would select octa and penta-BDEs. Here you would look at the elimination and use of productions. Your area of work would be to, for example, do legal work, on the BDEs, new POPs, and here you would add regulatory measures. And you will already see that here you would find your previous entry point for PCBs. So we will continue working on the BDEs, continue, say that you have received funding under the Strategic Approach to International Chemicals Management for $100,000. You can add this activity. And if you save, here you ask, what is the status of this activity? And you say, well, this activity is ongoing. Is this part of the National Implementation Plan? Maybe not. And here, if we save and click yes, we will go back to the main entrance for Article 3 and 4 on industrial chemicals. And you will see here that you have your two entries for the BDEs and PCBs. You can, at any time, edit or remove them by clicking yes. Here you are in the PCB entry, and if you want to correct, for example, the amounts here, because the national industry only contributed 300, you can do that at any time. Save the changes, and save the changes again. And here, if we click No, we will go back to the main form. And you will see that we now have the entry entered there and aggregated, separating baseline, so national resources, with incremental external resources. And here is our reporting period 2010 and 14. It is likely that most programs and projects will be covered by Articles 3 and 4, 5, 6, 6, 1. It is, however, possible to add things. For example, thinking that, well, in the future, you're planning of updating your national implementation plan. So this is something you will need money for in 2010 and 19. So we will click here. And here you see that for this article and for further ones, there is a different way of presenting the information, simply to select so that you can have all of the POPs. And here, you're going to update your NIP. So you will select all of the POPs that it relates to. And here you have the related obligations. So you're not actually developing the NIP, you're updating your NIP. And you have the possibility to do that. Put in the different areas of work you're working on, continuing, and then again, here, looking at your national government's contribution to the project. Oh, it's not 3 million, but it's 300,000 we wanted to put in. And let's say you've received GEF support for it for 250,000. You can also highlight, for example, that this was an activity that you had planned before, but you had not received funding. So it's what we call a carryover activity. And if you save it and return then to the main format, you will see that the spreadsheet has been updated. And here you see in black that any updated area is now included. We hope that using this system, you will be able to report or to translate really the activities that you have in your NIP into this table. And although you will have to get used to using this format, as we hope that it's simple enough for you to be used. In the 5 minutes left, I would like to show you where you will find more information. We have sent invitations to national focal points to report, and we've invited them to consult our website, where under the implementation page and financial mechanism, you will find a page specifically on the needs assessment. On this page, you will be able to download here the reporting form that I've just shown you. There is also available some guidance on how to use the form. There are examples, it will give you descriptions along the line of the presentations I have just made. There are also elements I didn't have the time to show you in the slides, but you will also find additional information in the slides. There is also there format to provide a summary of your national implementation plans. As mentioned previously, this was required by the COP, that when you would submit your needs assessment report, you would also provide a summary of the NIP, highlighting critical, substantive, and financial issues. So here, it's simply an opportunity to provide a box on the summary of what your NIP has, and also provide just information on status. We're aware that a number of countries are currently updating their national implementation plans. And until that process is over, they might not have the information. However, here you could say, for example, that you're currently updating your NIP and provide a summary of where you are. Finally, well, as mentioned, the Secretariat has been given a mandate and requested to assist parties in reporting these financial needs. So we will be organizing a number of these webinars to assist you in undertaking this reporting. Some of them will even be in French and in Spanish. We're also developing the reporting form and the guidance in Spanish and French. We hope to have them available sometime soon. And in addition, the Secretariat is updating guidance that is crucial to develop national implementation plans. The NIP guidance is currently being updated, but it's going to be very relevant for you to do the needs assessment. There is also guidance on the calculation of action plans, so to help you identify costs for for issues you want to address. And then there are other guidance that will be hopefully useful. These should be available within the next 6 weeks, these updates, but you already have them on the website and they're linked to this main page. And finally, please also be informed that the Secretariat is happy to work with you on a bilateral basis. You have my contact details here in the presentation, and as well as those of my colleague Frank Moser. And you can really at any time get in touch with us to help you work through this form and undertake the reporting. So if you don't mind, I will maybe stop here the presentation and seminar and training, and maybe take some of your questions if you have any. So thank you again for your attention. I hope this was clear. I didn't go into all of the elements I wanted to, but I hope that there you have an overview of what will be required from you. One thing I forgot to mention is that this reporting is due in September 2012. So I will stop here and then maybe open the floor to a number of questions